Welcome or welcome back to day 2 of this series of short conversations with people whose knowledge and experience will support your teaching and organizing in the struggle for a free Palestine and the right of return, and against the ongoing U.S.-Israeli colonization, occupation, settlement, and genocide a century in the making. Please feel free to come and go over the course of the day. I'm Sabina Vaught, and I'm very honored to be welcoming Donna Nevel, who's a community psychologist, educator, and organizer. She's a founding member of Facing the Nakba Project and Jews Say No, and the Network Against Islamophobia. She co-created Jews Against Anti-Muslim Racism and was co-founder of Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. She has taught for many years at NYU. She writes and lectures widely on Palestine and Israel, Islamophobia, and organizing for justice. Please read Donna's work across numerous outlets such as Truth Out, the Boston Review, and many others. Donna, thank you for taking time to join us today in the midst of what I am observing is an incredibly busy organizing and activist schedule for you.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me here with you. I'm really pleased to be here.
Well, I wanted to start, if we could, by sharing that I believe your understanding and perspective as a community psychologist will be really profound for people on the call, particularly for educators. And I imagine there are many people who would really benefit from hearing about your organizing over time and in the current moment from that perspective, and really anything you want to share just to sort of get us going and thinking about that long work on the part of Jewish organizations in the struggle for Palestinian liberation.
Sure. So in addition to being part of a number of different groups and coalitions that have been organizing for justice in Palestine, I've also been part of a number of Jewish groups throughout the many years I've been involved with this issue. And I've worked with Jewish groups really for a few different reasons. One is that I just think it's important to have a voice that disrupts the mainstream Jewish narrative and the Israeli narrative that all Jews agree with them. And we can see by this, if we haven't known this beforehand, I think we can see by what's been going on these past few weeks that is very much not the case, that most Jews are in alignment with the government. I also think that for me, I consider it my responsibility to work within my community. I think that's just a responsibility, and not everybody wants to be doing that work. And I always say, if one doesn't want to, don't, but it is something that's meaningful to me. And also, I actually think being part of a Jewish organization, the way like JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, or others, is that it's really the best way to be accountable to a broader movement and to a Palestinian-led movement, and to be able to work with as much like integrity and principle as possible. So those are kind of the reasons that I've chosen as part of my organizing over these years to do it within like these Jewish spaces. And all the groups that I've been part of, certainly in the past many years, have worked in very close partnership with Palestinian and other racial justice groups. And just to share a few of the groups I'm part of now, because they've all been like different but overlapping experiences. As I'm living in Miami, Florida, and so I'm part of Jewish Voice for Peace South Florida, and obviously that presents its own challenges, being in a fascist state. And so that's part of what we consider in our organizing. And as part of that, JVP South Florida we're part of a coalition called the South Florida Coalition for Palestine. So I'm also part of an international Jewish collective called the International Jewish Collective for Justice in Palestine. And we are from about 12 organizations, all anti-Zionist Jewish organizations that work in partnership with Palestinian groups in their respective countries. And so we have maybe 12 to 15 countries. We meet monthly, and we've really started organized. We've just found it we didn't know what would come of it when we started. I think it was at the beginning of the pandemic, and we've all found it really, really meaningful. It's from South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, different parts of Europe, Canada. We've really been, I think our work has gotten strengthened, being part of this coalition together. So I guess, and I'm also part of, even though I'm not in New York anymore, I remain part of a group, Jews Say No, which is a smaller group, but we've all been, I guess for most of us, we've been longtime civil rights activists. And so we kind of bring that history to our organizing. Should I just keep sharing a little bit about maybe, okay. So also just in terms of like Palestine and Israel, I'm co-director and part of a center called Parseo, Participatory Action Research Center. And my co-director is Nina Mehta, who I want to give a shout out to because she's one of the most amazing people to do this work with. And so we do a lot of different things, but one of the things we've started doing more and more are community education and curricula, social justice curricula, that we've been asked to work on and work with. And I'm really, and our center is huge believers in like the power of community education, not as like an add-on to our organizing, but really as integral to it, as central to it. And so we have recently been part of developing 2 curricula. One is with Project 48, run by Nadia Sa, who's a Palestinian educator and strategist, and it's called the Palestinian Nakba curriculum, which we've worked on for quite some time, and you can go to project48.com. And it's a several session, very in-depth curriculum about the history of the Nakba. It's so many visuals and video movies from where you really see Palestinian life prior to and since 1948. And then there's sections on testimonies, the ongoing Nakba, archives. So it's a very comprehensive curricula that was created really for schools and universities and then other community spaces. So that's something that we partnered with Project 48 to create. And again, another shout out to Nadia Sa, whose work is just amazing. And I think I also mention these people because I think so much of this work is about, the relationships we're building and the people we're doing this work with. And like, I just feel right now just so grateful to have that opportunity to be doing this work with such wonderful people. And I also, so the second curriculum is called the Curriculum on Anti-Semitism from a Framework of Collective Liberation. And I mean, I could talk a little bit more about that but I'll just give a little bit of the background first. We were really asked, a number of social justice groups and educators came together, and, there's all this anti-Semitism curricula out there, but it's really problematic politically. It looks at anti-Semitism in isolation. It's just on many levels very problematic. And a lot of people in groups said we would like a curriculum on anti-Semitism, but from a framework of collective liberation. So we actually spent more time on it than we anticipated developing it. We have a beautiful group of advisors and community reviewers from many different communities who were part of going through materials. We did pilots. I mean, we had so many different people, Jewish historians, other historians, like just really like helping us develop it and look at it. And we now have it. We just did a launch. Haymarket did a launch with us. And I think part of that also is it grew out of one, this awareness that we need to understand what anti-Semitism is, especially at a time of rising white nationalism when Jews, along with so many other communities, are being targeted, but also that it's just as important to understand what anti-Semitism is not. And so we spend a lot of time in the curriculum. We go through Jewish histories and different experiences of being Jewish, Jews from different parts of the world, intersecting histories of anti-Semitism, what anti-Semitism historically has looked like in the US, what it looks like today. And then we spend time really talking about what anti-Semitism is not. What does it mean to exceptionalize anti-Semitism? who has the right to speak about anti-Semitism? And then we really spend time devoted to like what does it mean to really understand anti-Semitism from the framework and from the lens of collective liberation. So that's just recently been launched, and we are going to be, this coming week, we're actually doing some programs with different educators in New York and in the Bay Area, and we're looking forward to doing more of that with like across the country.
This is fantastic work, and I think Christy in the background is looking for the links. And so we'll try to get those and drop them in the chat for everyone. We're also, so you all know, compiling a list of all the resources all of our guests share with us, and we'll share that out at the end of the 2 days. Donna, I wonder, I'm imagining after hearing you talk about this curriculum project, I imagine people are interested in hearing a little bit, if you're comfortable or if it's possible to summarize what is a large project and a complex set of histories, what is and what is not anti-Semitism. I wonder if that's something that you might help educators think about how to understand, and its relationship to Zionism.
Great, I'm sure. And also the curriculum for anti-Semitism is antisemitismcurriculum.org. Yeah, the nupbookcurriculums.com, I often get them mixed up, but the anti-Semitism is .org. So do you want me just to share a little bit maybe about like what's in the curriculum? So we really open up with talking about, anti-Semitism. It's real, like other forms of injustice. It has distinct characteristics while also connecting and intersecting with other forms of oppression. And we talk about what anti-Semitism is, which we have lots of different examples of sort of different voices sharing what anti-Semitism is. And we kind of put our basic framework that it's, which I have here, generally understood as discrimination against Jews, violence against Jews, or targeting of Jews because they're Jewish, and stereotypes of Jews are also manifestations of anti-Semitism. And then we go into talking about how Jews really reflect like ethnically, economically, culturally diverse communities, experiences and histories. And so their experiences of anti-Semitism have differed quite dramatically throughout history. It's not static, it's interrelated to other systems of oppression, and also with what's happening in different societies at different times. And we then we go into that while Jews continue to live without fundamental systemic barriers in the US, in recent years, the rise of white nationalism has impacted Jewish communities. We are also clear that we focus on that, but it also, white nationalism impacts many different communities. So when you look at what happened in Charlottesville, for example, where it said Jews will not replace us, but the underlying purpose of that rally was anti-Black racism and white supremacy. So we also try to show, and we have a section where we talk about how white Jews have benefited from white supremacy, and how all Jews, white Jews and Jews of color, have been victims of white nationalist violence. And we spent some time thinking about that and talking about that. And then we move to, really looking at, and that takes some time. We have a lot of resources. We wanted to do it thoughtfully. And then we move into, again, while it's so important to understand what anti-Semitism is, it's critically important to understand what it's not, and that, as we know, organized campaigns are derailing and misstating the meaning of anti-Semitism and falsely conflating it with criticism of Israel and with criticism of Zionism. And so we have also seen that this tactic that's really been used by opponents of Palestinian justice for years and years and years. I mean, I'm 68. I remember in my 20s those tactics, but it's become very intensified as the movement for justice has grown and grown. Like it's on steroids now. You really you can see it in full force. And we also stress that this, the misstating and distortion of what anti-Semitism is, it furthers political goals that are harmful to all our work for justice, including that of fighting anti-Semitism. And then we talk about the different ways this is played out with the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which has examples that conflate anti-Semitism with criticism of Israel. We see how this is being pushed for in different, spheres of government, universities, and how it's all designed to silence critics of Israel's human rights abuses, to silence critics of Zionism. And then we spend a little time talking about data and the use and misuse of data, because when an organization like, for example, the Anti-Defamation League falsely considers criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism, and their accounting of what anti-Semitism is, obviously the data is all skewed and inaccurate. So we really talk about how important it is to kind of look at where your sources are coming from. And just as a little, another group I'm part of, which is a coalition, is called Drop the ADL. I think that's droptheadl.org, if I'm not mistaken. And we have we've created like a primer that talks about the damage and the harm that the Anti-Defamation League has done historically to this day, to those fighting for Palestinian justice, but also to communities of color, to Muslim communities, to so many different communities. And we had a letter that's been signed so far by, I think it's a few hundred social justice organizations now who are pledging not to work with the ADL. And we really want to continue building that. And we see just in the past weeks, the damage the ADL continues to do. I mean, actually, if possible, it seems like they're even getting worse. So I guess then from there, we really talk about who has the right. We challenge this notion of who has the right to speak about anti-Semitism. And while we honor this notion that, of course, those most impacted by an injustice should be in the forefront of talking about it, but we say there's something very pernicious going on here, because a lot of the attacks about anti-Semitism are false attacks of anti-Semitism. And also, so we believe it's very important for everyone to have that right. We've also, throughout the curriculum, have created roundtable conversations and interviews with Palestinian leaders, Black activists, people from different communities who talk about kind of looking at anti-Semitism from a framework of collective liberation. And we have a Palestinian human rights lawyer who really addresses this issue of who has the right to speak about anti-Semitism. So throughout the curriculum, we've included, and also part of that is we were thinking of not just colleges, because we have a lot of text, but we wanted to have a number of videos. And so we created many of them with some wonderful activists and educators throughout. And then we really moved to looking at what it means to challenge anti-Semitism from a framework of collective liberation. And we give lots of examples of different social movements and how they've organized, and kind of the issues from abolition to disability justice to others, about really looking at kind of how this work can be, how we can further this work for justice in a really meaningful way. So kind of that's the curriculum that we've developed. Yeah.
It's incredible work. And I just sent you through the Zoom chat the link to the Palestinian Nakba curriculum to make sure we're sharing the correct one.
Because there used to be a basic, yes, Project 40. Let me just make sure that, yeah, I'm sure that's it. It should be just project48.com, but I think this is curriculum. That's it. Yeah, that's definitely
okay, great. So Christy, if you're able to drop in the chat, fantastic. Thank you so much. You and I emailed a little bit, and I shared that on Friday. Dylan Rodriguez said, one of the things that many of us need to do is a deeper study of Zionism, sort of where it came from, how it works, how it gets entangled in these imperialist, colonial, genocidal frameworks. And so I wonder, and we've heard people say Zionism is anti-Semitic. There are these sort of different framings, and I wonder if you would help us think for a minute about the formation, role, function of Zionism and its relation to these other forms and movements that are kind of circulating as people are trying to struggle themselves or in solidarity.
One thing just to say, in the Nakba curriculum, we have an entire section. One of our sections is on Zionism, and really shows, one of the things we really wanted to show too was intentionality. And also, it's really important for me to say that anti-Zionism, while it stands against Zionism as a settler colonial ideology, it stands for justice. Anti-Zionism is an ideology that is deeply committed to justice and liberation for people, for Palestinian people, but it's also, that's the ideology that is really, so it's not just against Zionism, but it's really a very liberatory framework. And I think that's really important to say, because, you know, one of the things we know is that, and I think this is important, is that there is no connection between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. It's absolutely no connection. And when sometimes people will say, well, this anti-Zionist said something anti-Semitic. Well, people can call themselves anything. I've been with people who call themselves socialists and Marxists who say like really messed up stuff. And so, yes, any individual can say something, but the ideology of anti-Zionism it's the antithesis of anti-Semitism, because it's committed to challenging all forms of injustice, and that includes anti-Semitism. And the movement for justice in Palestine has been exquisitely sensitive about that and has put that out at every form. So anyone who wants to mistake anti-Zionism for anti-Semitism, who's putting that out there, I really do not trust their agenda. I mean, I don't mean that people who have genuine questions, because there are people who are confused and conflicted, and that's part of the work I'm committed to doing. But I'm talking about that movement to conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism has an agenda, and it's not really about fighting anti-Semitism, because it's about fighting liberation for Palestinian liberation. So I do think one of the reasons we put a whole section on Zionism in the curricula is that we think it's very important to understand the origins, the history, and the fact that the Nakba, the expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians from their land and their home, is the consequence of Zionism. That's what is Zionism. You can't separate one from the other. So yeah, I think, you know, all of us learning more together about this. I mean, just going back to my like deep commitment to community education, it's not for I mean, I love learning, but it's also because I think it deepens and sharpens our work for justice in like very significant ways, or at least I can say it has done that for me, because I had originally, when I was younger, I had started from 1967. I was against the occupation. I didn't know about the Nakba. It's not that the information wasn't out there, but growing up in Jewish spaces, I didn't learn it. And it wasn't until I began my organizing and work with Palestinians where I started hearing about the Nakba and what had happened. And then many of us came together to learn more. So I do feel like if you talk about the right of return for Palestinians, the support for boycott, divestment, sanctions, all of the things that we support, it goes back to understanding about the Nakba and Zionism as a settler colonialist movement. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I want to pull a question that we got in the chat that I think connects to another thing we emailed about, which is, you know, the way in which anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are being cast, narrated as distinct, particularly in schooling, maybe not particularly, but for people on our call, I think educational spaces are a particular context. And we're seeing legislation, we're seeing policy that's sort of, you know, bifurcating these as if they're oppositional when, you know, they share an origin and a weaponized purpose. And I wonder if you might help us think about that in your work and connected to this question of, are there actionable ways to address accusations of anti-Semitism when calling out or pointing to Zionist violence?
All right, there's a lot of questions in the question, so let me see if I can. I do want to say first, in terms of, because I spent a lot of time doing work around Islamophobia, and I've learned so much from the number of people I've worked with from Muslim communities and Muslim organizations who have done some such powerful work, and particularly looking at state-sanctioned Islamophobia. And in fact, you mentioned Jews Against Anti-Muslim Racism, and our website, all the information on it is from Muslim activists and scholars and educators. And so I just want to say that there are groups that really have looked at this very deeply and have really understood the relationship between the quote, war on terror, structural Islamophobia, and that's so important. I think, and something else I want to say sort of related is that one of the things that's really hard to stomach is that some of these Jewish organizations that actually support state-sanctioned Islamophobia come out with these statements. If there's like some kind of something that happens, they'll be like, we're really opposed to Islamophobia, when in fact their organizations are fomenting it. Because Zionism is right. It's, in addition to a lot of things, it's also rooted in anti-Muslim racism, along with many other things. And so I think for those of us who are committed to justice in that really deep, holistic way, that like we need to dismantle and kind of not allow that narrative to come forth, which is why when these organizations speak out, many of us from our different communities say, this is disingenuous. In fact, it's important to point out how these organizations claiming to speak against Islamophobia are in fact fomenting it. Many of our groups, from Muslim communities, Jewish communities, other communities, really are careful about who we will partner with for good reason. I mean, while all of us are very into, I think at this moment, for so because it's so important for building the broadest coalitions we can, like I think that's so important right now. I think it also, is important to be like thoughtful about not working with these organizations that are fomenting and perpetuating sort of the Zionist narrative that is actually rooted in all of these in negative things, and enabled to say, oh, well, we can march together for this or something like that. So I don't know if I really answered your question, but I think that there are, it's worth really being able to, like, again, kind of thoughtfully think about how do we frame this in a way that's not in some way feeding into or perpetuating some of the ways that Islamophobia in fact gets perpetuated by like kind of making kosher these other kinds of things.
No, absolutely. And it's making me think about your description of I'm not sure if I got this correct, but these sort of an international Jewish collective for justice in Palestine, these partnerships across diaspora. So you said somewhere between 12 and 15 countries, you have maybe chapters. And I'm understanding that you're communicating across those chapters to understand sort of the different contexts and struggles and fights. And I wonder if there's something in that model that might help people think about, how to navigate different organizations and coalitions. Like, is there something you're learning or have learned from that global model of local struggle?
Well, it's so interesting because I've learned so much. When we first got together, some of us kind of thought, let's have a phone call, because it was especially when the IHRA definition first came out, or it was getting more prominence. And we were like, let's see what other groups are doing. Many of us had different contacts. We came together and like, it was amazing. It was just, and there's groups who have, Ireland and South Africa are very different from the US and Canada. New Zealand is a whole different, and Germany right now with what's happening in Germany. And I think what's happened, and we're actually going to meet in person for the first time in June in London, everybody's sort of pooling their resources so that everyone can come. And I think it's that one is that as recognizing our different locations and situations, we've also been able to like offer support for one another. So when issues have come up, we not only, sort of discuss the local context, but we also are able to then broaden it to our global context. And many times we've been asked to write letters from all our organizations to send when a particular issue is happening. So I would say in terms of, why, because I love this group and I don't ever want to miss the monthly meetings, even though sometimes they're very inconvenient time-wise because we have to work it around everybody's schedule. but I'm always, because also these are all groups so rooted in racial justice work and in Palestine liberation work, hearing about different local contexts and kind of challenging ourselves and deepening our own work, I found it very valuable. It's just something that's we're learning. I walk away I leave each, I don't walk away, I'm on a Zoom call. I leave each Zoom meeting just feeling like I've got new ways of thinking and of sort of challenging how we're doing things. And there's only a few. We make sure there's not too many from the US. We don't want it to be US dominant, which is very easy to happen. And so we really also make sure that we have Latin America, also like just the different spaces and locations that we can always be learning from and with each other. Yeah, I find it, very, very valuable. I did want to mention though, just one thing, because I think we have to end it in a minute, but because, as some may know, there've been these large actions that Jewish Voice for Peace and others have done. So just 2 hours ago, my friends FaceTimed me from the Statue of Liberty, where they all were there taking over, having ceasefire now, never again means now, and not in our name. And there were hundreds and hundreds of people. And I have to say, when I got the FaceTime call, it was actually moving. And if anything, these mainstream Jewish organizations can say until they're whatever, that the Jewish community is with them. I don't think there's any way right now that they could make that claim with a serious face, because clearly the tide is changing, fortunately.
Yeah, thank you for that. I saw that on Instagram, and I think I appreciate the reminder to sort of be in direct action in whatever ways we can within communities and across communities. Our first speaker, Sharif Sagout, couldn't join us because he's with Arab Resource and Organizing Center in the Bay, and they undertook the Block the Boat actions on Friday for, I think it was maybe 9 hours, and then that ship went to Port of Tacoma. They're there since I think 5 o'clock this morning, maybe. And people are using their bodies in their cars and using, if they can't do that, using social media, using whatever, we all can do different things. So I really appreciate your bringing that direct action back in. And I think people feel disheartened because the massacre, the sort of, I said earlier, I'm not sure we even have language for this sort of accelerated genocide that we're witnessing. It feels both empowering to take direct action of multiple sorts, and also just a sort of horrifying sense of grief and responsibility. And I wonder if you might close with helping educators think about how to move through that with students, to think about the risks involved, and the sort of navigating this urgent call to all of us right now. It's an urgent call to risk in a variety of ways.
Yeah, I mean, it is an unbearable. It's an unbearable moment, and it's hard not to wake up in the morning and just think what can I do? What we're all trying to do, and there's so much powerful organizing going on. I mean, incredible among so many communities and just in every different way. And yet then we know what the machine is, what's going on and how it's happening. And I guess, and maybe what I feel is at this point, what we have is just continuing to build together. I mean, I feel like nothing's more important than our communities right now. I mean, I feel like the relationships that many of us have from all across the globe, we're with each other now. We're, however we can, supporting each other, and those who are particularly directly impacted in so many ways by families just not knowing what's happening to their families or knowing their families are dying. And I just feel like the more we can. And one of the things that we talk about when even educators bring this curriculum into the classroom too is how to support educators as they're up against, whether it's administrations or their school districts or whatever it is, but just to keep almost to forefront as much as we can that building of community that we can do. And also the one thing I do want to say is about not everybody has to do everything. And there's different ways of doing it. I mean, I struggle with this. I'm claustrophobic and I can no longer get arrested. I can't at this point in my life. And so I try to do many, many other things that I can do that I think are meaningful. And a lot of times people will come to me and say, you know, certain people can take the risk of getting arrested. Others absolutely can't. And I think we also have to be generous with one another in our movements to like really to know that there's so many ways, you know, there's just not one way to be the activist. And, you know, this is about all of our humanities and building like justice. And so I guess I don't have a great answer because we do wake up every morning and it's the most horrifying, you know, it is hard to get up, but we need to, and we have to, and we do, and we need each other. I guess without, you know, that's how I've been sort of, you know, both myself, but also when I'm talking to lots of new people who are getting involved. I also just don't want people to feel that like there's one right way to do it, because there's not. There's really not. And we also, for those of us who've been doing it for a long time, like it's really good for us to shut up sometimes too, and to know there's a lot of people, even if they've been involved for a week, they've got so much, you know what I mean? It's like, it tends to be a little bit of like, we're the experts, and like, no, that's not the case.
But we do really appreciate the knowledge, the deep knowledge that comes from your experience, and that, you know, you're willing to share that with us very honestly. And I know we all learned a lot in our short conversation with you. So I thank you so much for talking with us, for thinking with us, for sharing your time, so people can learn from your decades of work. Really grateful, Donna.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm also really was appreciative to be part of what I know is a wonderful, you know, what you're doing. And so thank you. And I've heard wonderful things about you from one of my dearest friends. So
maybe a mutual, maybe Uju.
Yes.
Yes.
Uju, who's one of my favorite people, but
Yeah.
she raves about you. So yeah, thank you so much.
Phenomenal. Thank you, Uju, if you're here. Thank you, Don.
Bye-bye.
Bye.